So up next is, this entire year has really been defined by many crises and many triumphs. But earlier this year, we had one of India's most exceptional public intellectuals, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, sharing the stage here with other speakers. And he said of all the crises facing the country, perhaps the biggest one was the crises facing our institutions and institutional collapses that were happening around us. The lack of presumed credibility across the board, across institutions. And the real pinnacle of that is the judiciary. I'm going to just reel off a few facts about the judiciary to bring home just how huge this collapse really is. There are 65,000 cases pending in the Supreme Court. Across the country, there are 26 million cases pending in the Supreme Court. There are more than 2.5 lakh under trials languishing in jail, not because they're convicted, but because they're waiting for their cases to be heard. On an average, a judge spends 5 minutes on a case. And in the Delhi High Court, I'm not sure if this is an apocryphal figure, but it would take 466 years for due justice to be done to all the cases that are waiting for a hearing in the Delhi High Court. So we have a massive crisis of missing judges, but we also have a crisis of credibility, of merit, of capability. And then the two biggest things that we've seen this year is the tussle between the executive and the judiciary for control and power, and real crisis about the constitutional value of separation of powers. And then there is the question of judicial accountability and corruption. Last month, we faced what many commentators, including Pratap, have really said is the biggest crisis in the judiciary since Mrs. Gandhi declared the emergency. And Pratap wrote this column where he said, the Supreme Court doesn't even exist anymore. That's a really big statement from a considered public intellectual. But there are people who have been fighting that battle of trying to bring accountability, probity, and merit back into this institution. And foremost amongst them is somebody that every country needs at least one of. And that man is called Prashant Bhushan. He has been at the center of pretty much every public battle that we fight. There are many times when his peers and others and commentators and television studios and the media pillory him, call him the stormy petrel. There are many appendages and, words and epithets that are attached to him. But you pick any big public battle, and Prashant is in the center of it. And certainly in the courts, we've called this session the courts and the samurai. He really is and embodies the spirit of the samurai in taking on that judicial battle. Last month, we had the case of the corruption scandal around the Medical Council of India, which perpetually goes all the way up to the Chief Justice of India. And we'll discuss that case here as our starting point. But what made that seem a nadir was that there were judges at open loggerheads with each other. There was the Bar Council that seemed to side with one side. There was Prashant, the petitioners, and many other lawyers who were clearly on the other side. And this seemed to symptomatize the problem in the judiciary. So to speak from a certain, if there is another side to this, is embodied by a man called Gaurav Bhatia, who's been a secretary of the Supreme Court Bar Council and who is an advocate. He's just demitted office yesterday. He used to be part of the Samajwadi Party, was a spokesman, but has now joined the BJP. So to a certain extent, he represents the voice of the executive in this tussle between the executive and the judiciary. To understand why this crisis is so germane to all of us sitting here and to understand the scale of it and what the solutions are, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Prashant Bhushan and Gaurav Bhatia. Sorry, you haven't got your mics? They're not here. There is? Oh, okay, sorry. So they're hidden solutions. So Prashant, let me start with you. As I said, you've really been at the center of every public battle, especially to do with the judiciary. And I remember an interview that I did with you about 10 years ago when you were feeling very bleak about the condition of the judiciary. And you had made, in fact, a big statement about the possibility that almost 8 out of the last 16 Chief Justices were corrupt. 10 years later, are you feeling even more bleak, or have you and others who are fighting this battle achieved something along the line? That's one question. And second, as Pratap Bhanu Mehta says, that this is perhaps the greatest crisis facing the judiciary since the 1970s. Do you agree with that?
To answer your firstly, thank you for all your kind words. I think you were over kind to me.
Someone has to be kind to you, Prashant. You're routinely savaged every day.
You see, unlike Roz, who was here earlier, I have not thought of my work as a mission in that sense. I only react to what I see. I react to the injustices that I see, and I try and do what I can. In some ways, the judiciary continues to remain the same as it was when you did that interview about 10 years ago. At that time, I said that about 8 of the last 16, 17 Chief Justices, in my view, have been corrupt. After that, there have been probably another 8 or 9 Chief Justices, and I think that ratio of 50% roughly continues.
Prashant, by the way, let me share with the audience, we faced a contempt of court case after that last interview, and Prashant, please don't enter me into another one.
I'm always there to defend you in case that happens.
In some ways, the situation today is, though these are temporary ups and downs. You see, when you have a bad Chief Justice, or one that you don't consider to be totally upright, you feel that things are very bad. Then you have a good Chief Justice. So things keep changing. But I think on the balance, things are about the same, which means that they are still pretty bad. It's not merely a question of corruption or lack of independence. Incidentally, these two issues are related, because the more corrupt a judiciary is, the less independent it is going to be. And the reason is very simple, that a corrupt judiciary is easy to blackmail by a corrupt government. You see, you can always threaten a corrupt judge that, look, if you don't toe my line, you go to jail. If you don't toe my line, I'll have you impeached, or I'll expose you at any rate. So these two things are intimately related. And that is why, even for the independence of the judiciary, you need to have a judiciary that is honest, which has robust systems of accountability in order to deal with corruption when it arises.
So Prashant, the other question that I asked you was that do you feel that really after the 70s, we are at a moment of particular crisis? You said there's a kind of undulating wave. Are we at a moment of particular crisis?
Yes, in some ways we are at a moment of particular crisis, and the recent medical college case symbolizes that crisis. If you try and understand what that case is, see, the CBI registered an FIR which said that there was a conspiracy involving officers of a medical college, some middlemen who had been brought from Odisha, a retired judge from Odisha, and some other public servants, in order to procure a favorable judgment in a case pending in the Supreme Court by bribing. So the FIR said that large bribes have been collected and bribes are about to be paid. That's the point of time when this FIR was registered. Now, this is a very serious matter, because if the CBI, which is a government-controlled investigative agency, is investigating, and as it happened, this case was being dealt with by the Chief Justice. He was heading the bench dealing with this case, about which the FIR said that huge conspiracy, planning and preparation to bribe and procure a favorable judgment. If this is the situation and the government-controlled investigative agency has this kind of information or evidence, it's a very, very serious matter, both about the integrity of the judges as well as about the independence of the judiciary, because this kind of information and evidence can be used to blackmail those judges by the government and thereby compromise their independence. And therefore, we approach the court saying that this kind of sensitive investigation should not be left in the hands of a government-controlled agency. It should be in the hands of a SIT appointed by a bench of the 5 senior judges of the Supreme Court and headed by a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Of course, even that's not the best possible solution, but in the circumstances, that seemed to be the best possible solution to this problem.
Sorry, Prashant. I just quickly wanted to ask how many of you are familiar with this case. If you would just do a quick show of hands, then, okay, that's very few. So I'm just going to say it to you in short. It really was making headlines all of last month. I'll say it very quickly, Prashant. A retired judge in the Orissa High Court was arrested, Justice Kudusi, and because there was an allegation that the Medical Council of India had prohibited some colleges from taking admissions, and Justice Kudusi and others were taking bribes from these colleges, and one particular one in Uttar Pradesh called the Prasad Trust, for overturning that judgment and allowing colleges to take admissions. Now, in that allegation, there was an allegation that this bribery trail was going all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court benches that were hearing the case were also compromised. But the FIR did not name
That's
any of...
That's factually not correct, actually.
Okay,
I think the facts should be placed in the right perspective. So
Okay,
once you are done, I would like to place the facts to the
Sure,
audience.
I'll come back to it, but there was a sense that the bribery trail was going all the way up to the Supreme Court, though it did not name any of the judges in the Supreme Court. But the bench that had heard this case was headed by the Chief Justice of India, which was Chief Justice Mishra. So when Prashant and Kamini Jaiswal put in a petition in the court saying that this should not be left to the CBI, but it should be a Supreme Court appointed special investigative team, there was a lot of conflict in the court because Chief Justice stepped in and decided that the bench that Prashant and Kamini Jaiswal had gone to was not correctly constituted because he has the administrative right to set up the bench. And so there was a massive, kind of conflict situation in the court where one set of judges and another set of judges were really at loggerheads about the propriety of who should hear this particular case. And that's really, in a nutshell, what it was about. Ultimately, Justice Mishra, the Chief Justice of India, asserted his right to be the person who will choose the bench. And it would have seemed that it would be correct for him to recuse himself because there was a conflict of interest, but he didn't recuse himself, and he decided which bench this case will go to, and Prashant and Kamini Jaiswal's petition was ultimately dismissed, and a fine has been put on them. So this is really the conflict situation that we are talking about. So Gaurav, you wanted to set the record straight. I'll also share that Gaurav was amongst the lawyers who came into the court and defended Justice Mishra against Justice Chalameshwar and others who felt that Justice Mishra should not be listening to this petition at all and should not be exercising his right to constitute the bench. So, yeah. So Gaurav, why did you come in? There clearly seems to be a conflict of interest here. We'll come to the propriety of what Prashant and the other petitioners did, but why would the Supreme Court Bar Association come into a situation like this and also act without propriety to get themselves intervened and heard in a case that they were not party to?
I'm quite surprised you've been briefed very nicely about the facts, but some of them that you're stating are not correct. Let me first discuss the larger issue pertaining to the judiciary. And I must, with some responsibility as I speak as a lawyer, tell the audience here that if there is an institution which is most respected in the country, then it is the Supreme Court of India. It is manned by around, right now there are 25 judges of the Supreme Court. They are men of impeccable integrity. And the worst part is the right that is available to every citizen, that one would not be condemned or announced guilty without a hearing, is not available to them. Because if allegations are made in relation to the judges, they are not even allowed to speak. They are expected to speak through their judgments. And that is why the role of the Supreme Court Bar Association becomes very important, because actually you protect the institution, and the institution comprises of the judiciary and the lawyers. Now, I must say that when this case was being heard, certain very important facts have to be put forward. One is that the respective High Court had given relief to a medical college. And when this matter came before the Honorable Supreme Court, and I have the orders with me, but I am not placing them, this bench, comprising of 3 judges of the Supreme Court, headed by Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Mishra, actually set aside the order of the Allahabad High Court, gave them no relief. This was in August and September. After that, an FIR was registered, and I have a copy of the FIR, but for the benefit of all the persons who are present here, the FIR said that there is a person who claims that he will get the matter settled because he has contacts with the highest public functionaries. There were no allegations in the FIR in relation to any of the Supreme Court judge. No judge was named in the FIR. Now, the sinister design, which the bar question started now, I must share that a lawyer also has professional duty to not do forum shopping. That, if you're assigned a court, you are expected to argue before this court, and you can't ask for another court or make allegations. One PIL was filed by the forum that Prashant ji is associated with. Very rightly, the court number 2 said that it would be heard after 2 days. Now, proper would have been for them to wait for 2 days because there was no urgency. But rather, an identical word-by-word petition was filed, and then again mentioned, and these are legal terms, but I'll explain. Mentioning is for urgency. And now this was heard at 12:45, which was inappropriate. So therefore, it amounts to forum shopping. And second, I think that was not disclosed to the bench also. Regarding the question that Chief Justice of India assigned the bench, there are judgments and which clearly say that Chief Justice of India is the master of the roster. Prashant ji is a very eminent lawyer, and when you are an eminent lawyer, it is also your duty to know the law, because we are all lawyers, we know the law. Therefore, the Chief Justice was right in constituting a bench which was headed by 3 other judges. The 2 questions that are very vital, that is the judicial forum trying to say that 3 judges who declined relief, set aside the order of the Allahabad High Court, all 3 were compromised? Why do we sit in numbers of 2 and 3? Because, say, if, God forbid, one judge is compromised, there would be a check and balance, there would be other judges. And second, I would also say that I would just like to, read these lines. Say if there are directly allegations against the Chief Justice of India, then who hears, who constitutes? It is settled in DC Saxena, just 3 lines. It says, when imputations were made against the Chief Justice, the petitioner assumed, in our view, wrongly, that the CJI cannot constitute benches, nor should he discharge the functions of Chief Justice until the matter is decided. So, what the bar did was, we went by legal precedents, and I must say with great pain, that when young lawyers argue a matter before the court, and your case is dismissed, when you work day and night, we bow down to the majesty of the court and we accept the verdict. But there is a very, I would say, worrying trend in the Supreme Court. There are 4 or 5 lawyers who are actually, urban Maoists. They appear in the court, and if the court doesn't agree with them, they threaten the court. They start casting aspersions on the judiciary, which I think is very unhealthy for the institution which we all respect and revere.
Okay, thanks, Gaurav. But it's good, but when you are arguing against throwing epithets on the judges, to call lawyers who may have a differing point of view from you urban Maoists is also a kind of epithet throwing,
See, I
So,
would only say when you start calling names for the judges, when on national televisions without an iota of evidence, you start saying that the Chief Justice of the country, the head of the institution, is compromised, how painful it would be for the judiciary, for every judge, the Chief Justice of India, who can't even revert back.
Sure.
I'll share something with you. This was purely professional. And I respect Mr. Prashant Bhushan ji. He is my senior in the Supreme Court. But when there were lawyers who came to actually, probably manhandle him, I was the first one to come and ensure that, he leaves the court without even being touched. I did it for my institution. I did it because I respect him as a lawyer. But at the same time, he came out. And why am I sharing this with the audience? Because issues are issues. You have to fight on principles. You can't make it personal. He immediately tweeted after, a program where we were crossing our views or exchanging our views. He said that Mr. Gaurav Bhatia had appeared for one of the medical colleges and therefore, he doesn't want the truth to come out. Now, if Mr. Ram Jethmalani appears for a terrorist, does he become a terrorist himself? I think it is a professional duty
but
to appear
Gaurav,
for such
sure,
colleges.
Gaurav,
Yeah.
you've had your say, but there are just two things, and then I'd like to take Prashant on. One is that you said it's not right for lawyers to be throwing accusations on the judges or epithets on the judges.
Without any proof.
And you use that as a rationalization for why you would call lawyers urban Maoists. So I just wanted to say part of this public discourse thing that we are talking about is that when you're saying one thing is wrong, you're trying to correct it by doing the second wrong.
No, I'm not.
So
I'm not. I use the term because it is against our professional ethics. A lawyer is expected to, at all time, maintain rectitude, maintain discipline in the court. And yes, supreme doesn't mean that they are always correct. But under rule of law that we follow, once the Supreme Court has given its verdict, it is, to be abided by every citizen.
Sure. So Prashant, let me come back to you. There are a couple of things that Gaurav has raised, apart from the emotionality of the argument that he's making. He has raised a couple of things which commentators who feel very strongly that you and Kamini were making a correct petition have also criticized, saying that, one, there was certain amount of forum shopping, that you were trying to get yourselves heard by a bench who you felt would be sympathetic, even if it's in the right cause, but that it was forum shopping. And second, the propriety of this, that perhaps you jumped the gun, and rather than giving the Chief Justice a chance to recuse himself, the process was jumped, and a bench was announced without giving him a chance to first recuse himself, and that you could have challenged him if he had not recused himself. Would you accept that those were breakdowns on your side as well?
You see, Gaurav said that there is no judge named in the CBI FIR. I mean, I could tell you a lot of things about the exact facts and the exact sequence of events that transpired in this case, I mean in the medical college case, and why those facts and circumstances give rise to very serious suspicions about the manner in which the Supreme Court was dealing with that case. You see, first a petition is filed in the Supreme Court. That petition is then allowed by the Supreme Court to be withdrawn in order for the medical college to approach the High Court. Thereafter, the High Court passes an interim order in favor of that medical college. Thereafter, when the medical council...
Prashant, forgive me, I have a fear that we may lose the audience.
I know. That's why I didn't want to go into all this.
It's very important that we stick with the larger issue. As I said, why should this crisis in the judiciary? And it's symptomatic that a very elite and engaged audience, professionals, top of their professions, are almost unaware that this entire scandal happened in the judiciary. There were controversy.
Controversy would be a better term.
Okay, that's a better word. So why should this audience be interested in this issue?
I agree, they should not be.
They should not be.
I was only saying that to say...
Prashant, that was a rhetorical question. You were supposed to explain why they are interested.
They need not be. They need not be, because all that is important is, you asked me whether I was forum shopping. I said right in the beginning that the reason why we mentioned this matter before court number 2 was because this matter directly involved the Chief Justice. When you have an FIR which is saying that conspiracy to bribe, planning and preparation, collection of money for that bribery has taken place in order to procure a favorable judgment in a case in the Supreme Court which is being handled by the Chief Justice, then obviously a case involving this that we had filed ought not to be either heard nor even dealt with administratively by the Chief Justice. Therefore, we felt that this was not a matter where the Chief Justice was sitting in a constitution bench, and the rules say that then you mention before court number 2. That's why we mentioned before court number 2, and initially the order was that it should be listed before that court on Friday. During lunch, I received a call.
Prashant, I'm sorry, both of you are too into the heat of this incident. Just let me pull back a little bit to ask you, what is the principle at stake over here? As I said, this is an audience that represents the middle class, professional, upper middle class, or constituency of this country. What are the principles at stake here which matter for the rest of the country? There's conflict of interest.
There are two principles at stake, primarily. One, that if there is a allegation, a serious allegation, as there was in the CBI FIR, and I believe that they had tapped the phones of many of these middlemen, etc., so they have considerable evidence to back up what is stated in the FIR. If you have an allegation that such a serious conspiracy, preparation and planning to bribe judges of the Supreme Court for procuring a favorable judgment, which involves the Chief Justice, has taken place, two things are very important. First, that matter must be investigated thoroughly, deeply, fairly. And second, that this must not provide any opportunity to the government to blackmail those judges. For both these principles, it was important that this matter be investigated by an SIT formed by the 5 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court, other than the Chief Justice, of course, because he had a conflict of interest. The third principle is of conflict of interest. You see, obviously, when you have an allegation saying that conspiracy, preparation, and planning has taken place to procure a favorable judgment by bribing huge sums of money in a case which is being handled by the Chief Justice, obviously that planning and preparation is not to bribe anybody else, obviously the judges who are handling that case. Therefore, those judges who are handling that case cannot hear a case which is seeking an independent investigation in that very case.
Sure.
So that's why this was important that, and I don't understand why was the Chief Justice in such, so anxious that the 5 senior-most, the court number 2 had just ordered that the 5 senior-most judges should hear this case. Why was the Chief Justice so anxious that the 5 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court should not hear this case, and he must assert his right to constitute a bench of 3 very junior judges?
Sure. Prashant, Gaurav, I know you want to speak on this, but I need to move away because
I'm not going to be touching this topic because I think for the audience also it is important that we dwell on even more serious issues that you were talking about. But just a quick rebuttal, and that is relevant. Public interest litigation, as we all know, is meant for the marginalized, for the poor. And I'm not going to now go back to the case because I have already given the cases and the legal background. But there are lawyers who are actually more interested in filing PILs which are not concerning the poor man. They concern corporate houses, They concern, where crores are involved. Now, I would be a very worried man that we are losing the real essence of public interest litigation. And my objection, and I am not going to take any names, but I think as a matter of principle, and the audience would agree, say if you say that a particular judge is not fair or is not above board, why are you still appearing in that court again and again and again? I think, these very people who think that they are the conscientious lot, then should stop appearing, send a strong message. But these very lawyers keep on appearing in the very same court. Second, Shoma, just one more point. 8 out of 16 Chief Justices of India are corrupt, is the allegation made by Prashant ji and Shanti Bhushan ji. This, they say, from 1990 to 2010. Are we a democracy that slept for 20 years? If they were so corrupt, would the audience not agree that from day one itself, when we feel that these judges are corrupt, we should enter the courtroom and tell the judge, we will not be appearing before you? Or we should seek favors first, appear, get relief, and then on the eve of retirement, make a statement that no, all 8 or 10 of them were corrupt. I think this is not acceptable. We should have, like the previous speaker was saying, we should have the courage. We should fight our fear to stand before the apex court of the country or the judge and tell him on his face, looking in his eyes, that you are not above board, we don't have faith in you, and therefore we will not appear in your court. That, I think, should be the principle that should govern us.
Okay, Gaurav, there's just one thing I'd like to say in response to that, and I'm not allowing Prashant to say it because I want to move on to the next point, which is that when you're saying that, you've just said that it's not good to make allegations without evidence. I think a lot of the petitions and the fights and battles that men like Prashant Bhushan and others who are asking for judicial accountability have been fighting is to really get investigations opened. When you said in the last 20 years, if we've had corrupt chief justices, we just saw that unless people are involved in a case, even an audience like this is not even thinking, just hold on, are not even thinking about the judiciary. So actually there's an institution that is breaking down. The next time
it's not breaking down. I disagree with you. And let me say this, that 67 years, I think thousands of lawyers, hundreds of Supreme Court judges, present and former, have built the credibility of this institution with their hard work, with their sincerity and dedication. And we should not inflict a wound on the Supreme Court of India without an iota of evidence on the basis of baseless allegations, that it does such a huge damage to the country that we are not able to repair that. And that is my point. So we should speak with responsibility when we hurl accusations at the judges who are people, I would again repeat, of impeccable integrity. But there might be a black sheep, but let's not paint the entire court with the same brush.
You're not in a television studio.
No, I am very passionate about it. And I think the audience can relate to what I'm saying. Any institution is built with the hard work of many people.
Gaurav, you'll just, trust our intelligence. We've got your message.
I do trust the intelligence of the audience.
You don't?
I do, I said. I do, I said.
Let's be fair.
That's strange when I said I do trust the intelligence.
Yes, we've had a session with Ross Savage, but he hasn't got that much courage yet,
No, I would state the truth, but I think they are very well-respected people in the audience, and we would like to put across our point Gaurav, fearlessly and fairly.
Gaurav, but, as I said, this is not a television studio. You're going to get time to speak, but let's have another point of view on it. When you're saying that, yes, speak responsibly about the institution, that's correct. I'm going to come back to you to ask you, when you are giving a certificate of impeccable integrity to everybody without doing due diligence, that's another form of irresponsibility as well. So I'm going to come back.
Can I respond then?
No, just hold on. I'm going to come back to you, Gaurav. Let's get Prashant in on another aspect. And I've just realized that we are actually really blind to, I agree with Gaurav, I'm not even going to say a collapse of the institution, but there are many worrying trends in this institution. Prashant, you've been also fighting this tussle between the executive, sorry, was that the bell? Okay. you've been very quickly, in literally 2 minutes, Prashant, pretend you're on Arnab Goswami's show, that, that you've been fighting the tussle between the executive and the judiciary in the appointment of judges. I just said about how there are millions of cases pending, but we have 1/5 the number of judges we need. And yet, the collegium system is not working, but we don't want the government to have a hand in it as well. Can you tell us about what you think is the solution to creating judges where we can agree with Gaurav that they have impeccable integrity because the process is so transparent and well done?
We need both processes, a proper and transparent process for selecting judges, as well as a proper and transparent process for handling complaints against judges. We have neither today. See, earlier the government used to appoint judges. Today the collegium of 5 senior judges appoints judges. But there is no transparency. There was no transparency there. There is no transparency here. They have now sought to put in some transparency in the collegium system, but very little. There is also no criterion, secondly, for selecting judges that they have framed. And secondly, these people are very busy people, the 5 senior judges or the law minister, etc. They don't have time. If 100 judges every year have to be appointed, you have to consider from a field of 1,000 people. You have to consider them across several criteria that you lay down and consider them properly. This requires time. This requires a full-time body. We need to have a full-time judicial appointments commission, not an ex officio body, which selects judges with some degree of transparency. People need to know who are the people being considered. For example, if somebody knows that this chap was a broker for judges, etc., he is a corrupt lawyer, and therefore he should not be appointed, they should have an opportunity to say that to the selecting committee. There is not even that degree of transparency today. But after that, once people are selected, you see, I have seen many people who were perfectly fine till they were appointed. But after appointment, they became corrupt because they realized that there is no accountability. So you need to have a proper, robust system of accountability, which means a body today, there is no body who can entertain complaints against judges. Either you go for impeachment, which is a political process, starts politically, ends politically. Therefore, you need to have a body like a judicial Lokpal, something, of course, they have not even appointed this Lokpal, but we need some independent body to whom complaints against judges can be addressed. That body must be independent of the government as well as of the judiciary. It should be totally independent.
Yeah. Gaurav, I'm really sorry we're running out of time, so very quickly, you've been so far speaking up for the judiciary, and that voice is also important. And in fact, this is a measure of what keeps our democracy safe, that you have two extremes, and so ultimately we are pulled to the middle ground, and so that's great. But if you were to acknowledge one anxiety you have about the judiciary, what would that be?
No, I feel that we are not two extremes because there is a lot of middle ground. And I wanted to come to this part of the debate. As a citizen and as a lawyer, I am very concerned when a Nirbhaya case happens and the parents of that girl have to wait for 5-6 years for justice. And I would give you an example of Uttar Pradesh. You spoke about 27 million cases pending, hundreds of vacancies in the High Court, 5 or 6 of them in the Supreme Court. A law-abiding citizen, when he goes through trauma and pain, a murder happens, some close one is murdered, or there is a rape, and he has to wait for justice for 30, 40 years. I think our democracy somewhere needs to introspect. And therefore, I would say that yes, whether it is the collegium system or whether there is a separate commission to appoint judges, but yes, if you have taken the difficult task of appointing judges, might as well sit, if you have to sit day and night to ensure that all vacancies are filled and justice percolates down to every citizen. And that is a cause of concern for all of us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a good note. When you start off stormy and then you have two speakers that both get claps, we know that we've arrived somewhere. But really, in a way, I hope that this is a wake-up call to also understand how divorced we can get from some of the real issues facing the country. This, as I said, tussle going on in the judiciary, the shape of the judiciary, to create accountability, to create separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary. We didn't even start to speak about judicial overreach and activism, and so many other issues. Our lives really hang on a thread when something goes wrong in our life and you move away from the commuter train that, Roz moved away from, and you fall into a zone which has trouble in it. You really want a functioning judiciary. And yes, Gaurav is right that there are many members of the judiciary that are holding up that institution. And Prashant is extremely right that many of them are pulling it down. And we can speak of just a couple of cases. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Hadia case. Just that will tell you, how wrong a judiciary and a judge can go. So I would really hope that the point of having this session, short as it is, inconclusive as it is that let's take more interest in this issue in the first place. Thank you very, very much, Prashant
you.
and Gaurav, for being with us.